बनी। बड़ा जो फायदा ये है कि उधर घर बैठे जो मर्जी।
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this 50th Golden Jubilee webinar at Believers Church Medical College and Hospital. Today is a very special day. We have done 49 international webinars with speakers from across the globe. And for this 50th webinar, we have a very special speaker too from Singapore. And he is going to talk about an introduction to forensic psychiatry. And to moderate the session also, we have a very special person from here from India, and I will be shortly introducing him too. Our speaker for the day is Dr. Rajesh Jacob, Senior Consultant Psychiatrist at the Promises Winslow Clinic in Singapore, Visiting Consultant Psychiatrist at the National University Hospital, Singapore, and he's also a Visiting Consultant Psychiatrist at the Singapore Prison Service. After completing his MBBS from the prestigious CMC Vellore, he went on to train in psychiatry in the prestigious Madras Medical College and went on to do his specialist training in UK, after which he worked for a few years and moved to Singapore. He has worked as adjunct assistant professor for the NUS YLL School of Medicine and Duke NUS Graduate Medical School in Singapore. He's been teaching medical students and has a vast experience in teaching postgraduate students too. He's been doing a lot of reports, forensic reports, and his reports have had critical acclaim across Singapore. So, a brilliant teacher, excellent forensic psychiatric specialist, and an amazing personality. We have with us our speaker for the day, Dr. Rajesh Jacob, sir. Sir, it's a great privilege to welcome you for our 50th Golden Jubilee webinar. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for the invitation. Happy to give a talk.
Thank you, sir. And to moderate the session and to take it from here, we have Dr. V.V. Pillai, sir, of the toxicology fame in India. He is currently the chief of Poison Control Center and head of analytical toxicology and professor and head of forensic medicine and medical toxicology in Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Cochin, Kerala. So he started the Poison Control Center of AIIMS, which is listed in the Global Directory of Poison Control Centers in the World Health Organization. He also started the Analytical Toxicology Laboratory, which is a nationally accredited clinical toxicology laboratory and receives samples from poison victims from all over the country. After completing his MBBS and MD from Gandhi Medical College, Hyderabad, sir has been working in Manipal, and then he has shifted to Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences. With more than 100 publications in national and international scientific journals, out of which more than 20 are peer-reviewed and published in PubMed. Sir is a thoroughbred academician and a brilliant forensic and toxicology specialist. He has contributed in toxicology in various textbooks like Oxford Textbook of Medicine, API Textbook of Medicine, Textbook of Emergency and Trauma Care, Tandon's Textbook of Cardiology, etc. He's also the editor of Journal of Indian Society of Toxicology and is a working group member of WHO Guidelines for Poison Control Network, Edinburgh, UK. He founded the Indian Society of Toxicology, for which he was president for 8 consecutive years. He was awarded the Society of Toxicology Travel Award 2018 at the 57th annual meeting in San Antonio, Texas, USA. So with all these great credentials, it's a great privilege to have you, sir, V.V. Pillai, sir, as moderator for this session. Welcome, sir. Over to you for the overview and handing over the session to our guest speaker, Dr. Rajesh, sir. Over to you, V.V. Pillai, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Jacob, for that very flowery introduction. I think the credentials of Dr. Rajesh Jacob are more important, and we are very privileged to have him here for this talk on forensic psychiatry. And I need to, at the outset, thank, first of all, Dr. Jacob Jason of Believers Church Medical College. And I'm very happy to be here to introduce this topic briefly and then hand it over to Dr. Rajesh Jacob. There is not much to say in forensic psychiatry, unfortunately, because as somebody said, I think I read it somewhere, forensic psychiatry is something like a Cinderella of psychiatry. It's very neglected. And in a country like India, especially, that is very true. It's a very important aspect of psychiatry which needs a lot more attention. And we have been doing our best with the Indian, medical curriculum to teach students about the basic aspects of forensic psychiatry. But unfortunately, when it comes to practical experience and posting a student in a forensic psychiatry unit, that almost doesn't exist in India, except for 1 or 2 centers. I think NIMHANS in Bangalore has got 1 unit, and I've heard 1 or 2 centers elsewhere, but virtually nothing else. So I'm very happy that there's an expert today, Dr. Rajesh Jacob, who has got wonderful credentials, and he's doing work in forensic psychiatry. So really like to listen to him and hear from him as to how this subject has evolved, maybe in countries like Singapore and of course the West, and what should be done to kind of develop the specialty in India also. I'll not take more time because we are all very eagerly waiting for Dr. Rajesh Jacob to take over. So I'll hand over the stage to him, the virtual stage that is, and let's listen to Dr. Rajesh Jacob the talk from now on is his. Thank you very much for the privilege of moderating the session.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for the introduction. And I'm very happy to actually give this talk and highlight the importance of forensic psychiatry to medical students in India. So as you rightly pointed out, forensic psychiatry is not a really a big area in India because people really are not aware of the forensic issues. The only exposure to forensic psychiatry happens when people do their MD in psychiatry. And exposure is also not consistent across all institutions. So as you mentioned, NIMHANS has got a unit. Madras Institute of Mental Health, Madras has got a unit as well. But most general hospital psychiatrist residents are not exposed to forensic psychiatry. They may know the theory, but they don't really work with the mentally ill offenders. So, and our postings in MBBS in psychiatry also is very limited. I think it's about 2 to 4 weeks in MBBS, and they're only exposed to either to the mental hospitals or the general hospital consultation layers in psychiatry. So there's really no exposure to the forensic aspects and the medico-legal aspects. So I could start now. I could start with my slides. And then we could have at the end, we could have some question and answer sessions looking at the scope of forensic psychiatry in India and also my experience in different countries as well. I could talk about that. But first, I'll give a bird's eye view of what forensic psychiatry is. And I am aware that the audience are mainly medical students. So I've kept the slides quite, not very complicated. But just to give an overview, there's much more to the slides, but it's like covering different aspects of the topic. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen for the slides. Okay, hope you can see my slide. So I'm just making it into a slide viewer.
Yes, sir, we are able to view your side.
Yes. So what is forensic psychiatry? Basically, it's a part of psychiatry which deals with patients and problems at the interface of the legal and psychiatric system. So the medico-legal interactions. It's actually a subspecialty of psychiatry. So psychiatry has got different specialties: adult psychiatry, child, psychogeriatrics, and forensics is a subspecialty where it's a medico-legal aspects of the specialty is applied to clinical issues in legal context. So as mentioned, you can apply the psychiatric principles in legal procedures. It can be either civil procedures or criminal procedures. The criminal procedures are probably more interesting and more sensational. So when people commit homicides or when they commit serious offenses, one of the questions the courts want to know is whether there was a mental illness in that particular person. So that's where the criminal forensic psychiatry comes in. And then the second important thing of forensic psychiatry, how is it different from a general psychiatrist who works in a hospital? A general psychiatrist, his role is to assess the patient and come to a diagnosis, and then also to give treatments, both psychotherapy as well as pharmacological therapy. But a forensic psychiatrist, his main role is to assess and evaluate the individuals from a medico-legal perspective. It's not a treatment perspective. So his aim is to look at the offending done by the person, and then look at reasons why he offended and look for mental illnesses. So it's more of an assessment for the courts and evaluation. And then the next thing would be issues involving criminal responsibility. So how responsible is he for the crime? Was there a mental illness? And if there's a mental illness, how did it contribute to the crime? That is what criminal responsibility is. Then competency. Is he competent to write wills? Compensation, post-traumatic stress disorders. When people get injured in accidents, road traffic accidents, they can claim compensation. So is there again a mental disorder there? And then we also talk about risk assessments of dangerousness, and we also give opinions on sentencing. So when we write reports to the courts, we also say that this particular person has got a severe mental illness. He may not be appropriately placed in a prison setting, but would be better placed in a hospital setting. But he's not released into the community. He needs long-term treatment. So we also give opinions on sentencing. So we can also give opinions about community sentencing. He may not need to go into prisons, but he can be treated in the community under a treatment order, which I will come to later. Okay, the next one would be the duty is to the court, not to the person who instructs or pays him. So it's an ethical duty the psychiatrist has. So a lawyer may hire a forensic psychiatrist. The public prosecutor may look for a government psychiatrist. So you have two psychiatrists on both sides who would be doing reports, but the duty is still to the court. It's not to the lawyer who pays for the report. Next thing would be there's a lack of confidentiality and disclosure to third parties. Typically in a treatment setting, there is a patient-doctor relationship. But in forensic psychiatry, there is no doctor-patient relationship. So the first thing we tell the person is that I'm here to see you for the medical legal assessment. My instructions are from the courts or from the public prosecutor or is from the defense lawyer. And whatever you tell me is not confidential. The information which I write in the report can be forwarded to the other side and also to the courts. So that principle is explained right at the beginning. Third thing is, I've already mentioned about the difference from the role of a treating psychiatrist. So it's very focused and narrow and specific to address legal issues. And then medical experts should assess the court by giving very objective, unbiased opinions. You don't want psychiatrists to be biased or working like a defense lawyer. The duty is to be unbiased and objective and look at just the forensic aspects of the case. Now, what is civil forensic psychiatry? Civil forensic psychiatry also, we do quite a few reports for them. So it's basically a person who may be 75-year-old or 80-year-old person who may have dementia or memory issues. He may want to write a will. So does he have the mental capacity to write a will? Does he understand his property? Does he know his financial affairs? Does he know who his dependents are? So we assess something called testamentary capacity, we assess mental capacity. Then injury cases, somebody may be involved in an accident. They may suffer from physical injuries or even psychiatric injuries like post-traumatic stress disorder. So we write reports for that as well. So here the standard of proof in civil is lower. It's balance of probability. Unlike a criminal, it's beyond reasonable doubt. Then we carry out mental capacity assessments in nursing homes. When people are unable to look after themselves, then they can appoint a beneficiary or a donee who can look after their personal affairs and their financial affairs. And they can appoint something like a LPA, lasting power of attorney, and a court-appointed deputy, which is under the Mental Capacity Act, which is used in Singapore and also in the UK. Now, coming to criminal forensic psychiatry, which is a major part of my talk here, and it's probably more interesting to hear about criminal psychiatry compared to civil psychiatry. So in criminal forensic psychiatry, the main principles when a psychiatrist is called to give his opinion is basically, first of all, whether there's a mental disorder. Now, mental disorders, we classify them based on DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the American one, or the ICD-10, the WHO one. So we first assess whether there's a mental disorder in the particular offender. Next thing is we look at unsoundness of mind, whether the person was of unsound mind at the time of the offense. Then we look at the mental state at the time of the offense. So somebody's committed a murder. Was he mentally unwell at that time of the offense? Did he suffer from mental illness? And how did the mental illness contribute to the offense? Then we look at fitness to plead. So is he able to understand the charges against him? So if he's charged with murder, section 302, does he know that he's charged for 302? Does he know the outcomes or the possibilities if he's found to be guilty? So he can face a death penalty, he can even face life imprisonment. So does he know about the consequences about pleading guilty and not guilty? So if you plead not guilty means you're going to court, you're going to claim trial, and you have to give evidence in the stand. So does he know all those principles? And then, as I mentioned, criminal responsibility. What is the link between the mental disorder and the offense? So these are the main principles of forensic psychiatrists we comment in our reports. We also give, as I mentioned earlier, we also give opinions about after sentencing. So if people with mental illnesses, you may find they may commit not very serious crimes like petty crimes like theft or exhibiting themselves in public, exhibitionism, or throwing things down, vandalism. So these are not considered serious offenses. So is it right for them to go to prison if they have a treatable mental illness? So there are countries, or even in Singapore, we have something called mandatory treatment orders, where instead of the person going to prison for minor crimes, they are given an MTO, mandatory treatment order, and they are mandated to attend psychiatric treatment as an outpatient in the main hospital, which is a government hospital here. So it's compulsory. So they're given an MTO for 1 year or 2 years, and they have to see the psychiatrist and psychologist or the case manager or social worker every month, and they are compelled to take treatment. So if they don't attend these appointments, then they can be sent to prison, or they are monitored in the community. So it avoids them going to prison, but they're mandated to receive psychiatric treatment. But for this particular MTO, the mental illness should have contributed significantly to the offense. And again, here the psychiatrist will actually write that in the report. So the forensic psychiatrist also gives the courts some suggestions about from a forensic point of view, what are the different possibilities. So they can be given probation sometimes instead of going to prison. Young offenders below 21, they may be given probation. So they are in the community, but they are monitored. So this is another role we carry out. If you look at a classical criminal, let's say a person commits murder. So initially he's held in remand. They don't usually get bail in Singapore because the bail amounts are very, very high. So they're held in remand, and then the case goes to trial. If the person claims trial, the trial may happen 2 or 3 years down the line. So he's held in remand for 2 to 3 years. That's a pre-trial phase. So during the pre-trial phase, every homicide offender in Singapore gets a lawyer. If he cannot afford a lawyer, then the government will actually pay for the lawyer, and the lawyer will come and see him in prison. And then every homicide offender in Singapore also gets a psychiatric assessment, a forensic assessment, usually very soon after he comes to prison. So let's say the homicide or the murder happened 2 weeks ago. Within a week after the murder, he's sent to the remand prison. And then we have the government psychiatrist who goes in and does a forensic assessment and assess whether he's got a psychiatric illness, and then does the usual forensic report. Then the lawyer also comes in later, and the lawyer can also find his own private psychiatrist who can also assess the patient. So these are for homicides. So the homicide rate in Singapore is very low. Average number of murders in Singapore per year is only about 20 per year. It's a very small number. There are years when there's only about 11 to 14. You can actually count them. So the assessment is quite systematic. These are for serious crimes. So homicides, drug trafficking, which face capital charges, and sexual offenses like rape, all of them get forensic assessment when they're in remand. So that's a pre-trial phase. Then we go to the trial phase. Trial phase is when the person goes to trial, is he fit to give evidence? Is he fit to plead? Is he fit to follow court proceedings? So the fitness to stand trial is something which is at the trial phase. And then we also comment about the post-trial phase, the different options, sentencing options for minor crimes, as I mentioned earlier, community sentencing. Now, a common misunderstanding or a common myth in the lay public is that somebody with mental illness or mental disorders are very violent. So is it a myth or is it true? So there's evidence for both sides, but the problem in our society or in any society is that if a mentally ill person commits a serious crime, commits a murder, then the case is sensationalized in the newspapers, and then people may say that he needs to be locked up for life. So the mentally ill persons causing murders are not really reported or not highlighted, but somebody with a mental illness commits a serious offense, it's highlighted in the public, and the lay public have got the stigma towards mental illness as well. So therefore, the fear of mentally ill people committing serious crimes increases in the public, in the community. So there is a smaller risk or a higher risk in certain categories of mentally ill offenders, especially the paranoid schizophrenia states, which I'll come to. So if somebody's got a paranoid illness, suspicious, they are very paranoid, they believe people are plotting against them, people are following them, or suspicious of the spouse, then the risk of violence increases. So you can have paranoid psychotic states occurring in schizophrenia, bipolar illnesses, delusional disorders, and also secondary to drugs like cocaine, amphetamine, cannabis, and also alcohol. So it can be a primary psychotic illness, it can be secondary psychotic state, secondary to drugs or to alcohol. So a paranoid state is a risk factor for violence. Now, people diagnosed with a serious mental illness or psychosis are 4 to 6 times more common to commit a violent offense as compared to somebody with not a serious mental illness. So the risk in serious mental disorders like schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia is higher. Now, link between psychosis and non-violent offending is not clearly established. So somebody commits shop theft, somebody does vandalism, that link is not really established. If you look at all the violent cases in the community, less than 10% of all violence is attributable to severe mental illness. So 90% is actually not due to severe mental illness. Violence acts in the community. If you look at homicides, 5 to 10% of homicides are committed by people with schizophrenia. So again, it's not a big number, but risk of violence increases when there's a mental disorder, when there's comorbid substance use, and also a personality disorder. So if you have these three combinations, somebody's got schizophrenia, somebody's abusing alcohol or drugs, and they also got a paranoid personality, then obviously the risk of violence is much more higher. So, so we also look for these disorders in everybody we see. And victims of offenders, somebody who commits murder, most of the time it's somebody who they're known to. So it can be a spouse, it can be a family member. So they're usually related, family members or relatives or friends, close friends. So it's quite common there as well. Somebody takes drugs, the risk of violence goes up. So especially the drugs which increase dopamine levels in the brain. So think drugs like cocaine, amphetamine, which is called ice. Alcohol is very common in India and Kerala as well. Cannabis, again, very common in India, are drugs which can increase the risk of violence, because they increase the levels of dopamine in the brain and they're disinhibitory. Nicotine and opioids, by using heroin or morphine, the risk is actually not proven in research. Personality disorders, definitely higher risk. We know of antisocial personality disorders where people don't have remorse, they don't have guilt, they don't have empathy, they have conduct disorders in childhood, so they're basically badly behaved. They use drugs, they use alcohol. So the risk of violence goes up in people with antisocial personality disorders and borderline personality. Borderline personality is a condition where they may have self-harm, feelings of emptiness, anger outbursts. So it's more common in women. So somebody's got an antisocial personality disorder or a borderline personality disorder, the risk of violence goes up. And you also find comorbidity. So you may have a depressive illness with a borderline personality disorder. You may have a bipolar disorder with a borderline personality. So again, the risk goes up. And the reasons why personality disorders are more prone to anger or to violence is because they're hyperarousal, they have poor emotion control, especially anger. So they get angry easily, they lack empathy, and they're impulsive. So they don't think of the consequences and they act first. Okay, now coming to a role of a forensic psychiatrist. So I can give you an example. So I'm a psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist doing court reports. So again, let's go back to murder. So if somebody has committed a homicide or a murder, I'm asked to go to the prisons and then see the particular inmate or the offender. So when I first go and see him, I explain to him that, okay, I'm the psychiatrist, forensic psychiatrist sent by the public prosecutor or by the lawyer, and I'm here to give you to do a report for you regarding your offense. So I explain the context. I also tell him that whatever information you tell me is not a doctor-patient relationship. It's actually for the courts and for the case that he's facing. So there's no confidentiality here. So that is explained right at the beginning. If the person doesn't speak English or doesn't speak the language, I can speak Tamil. So they don't speak Tamil, then we get interpreters. If they speak Chinese, we usually go for a Chinese-speaking psychiatrist. If they speak Malay, we go for a Malay interpreter. So interpreters are provided by the state. Then we interview the person in the prisons. We at least see them 3 to 4 times over different dates to get more validity. We also have to look at other sources of information. So we look at past records. We've got past psychiatric history. We trace those records. We speak to family members, a range of family members. So parents, spouse, siblings, friends who know the patient very well. So corroborative information in psychiatry is very important because, as you know, psychiatry is not a field of medicine like surgery or endocrinology or whatever. So in endocrinology, you do a blood sugar test, you know it's high blood sugar, low blood sugar, or low sodium, high sodium. But in psychiatry, we don't have any blood tests, we don't have any scans to diagnose patients. So it's all history taking and from different sources. And forensic psychiatry history taking needs to be even more intensive and even more systematic because the outcome is medical legal. It's not for treatment. It's not making a diagnosis. It is actually can affect this whole outcome of the case. So we need to be very, very thorough and very, very systematic. Speak to as many number of people for corroborative history. We also get police statements. So when the person is arrested for murder at that time, the police can come to the house. When they're arrested, the investigating officer can also write a report saying when he was arrested, he was found to be very violent or found to be very agitated. He was found to be confused. So all those factors also are very, very important because at the time of the offense, the mental state is very significant. So this information will be useful to us as well. So we see the offender at least 3 to 4 times at different points of time. We also conduct a physical examination to check for any medical issues. And then we do an MSc. So in psychiatry, we do something called a mental state examination where we assess the speech, the thought process, assess for delusions, hallucinations, OCD symptoms, depressive symptoms, suicidal ideation, cognitive impairment like memory deficits, dementia, delirium. So different, just like we do a structured mental state examination in psychiatry for this particular offender. And then if we find that the person needs further testing, so let's say we suspect his IQ may be low. Let's say his education history was very bad. He's failed all his classes in primary school. And he's not done well in school, then we may suspect intellectual disability or mental retardation. So then we get a psychologist to come in, do IQ testing. So that also is done sometimes for some people when it's clinically indicated. We can also do neuropsychological assessments by a psychologist as well. Somebody with head injury or epilepsy, where we suspect neuropsychological impairments, we also get a psychologist to do this. We can also order brain imaging. So CT scans, most homicide offenders or capital cases of drug trafficking, we order CT scans as to look for any organic factors because it's high stakes, because the outcome can be actually even death penalty. So we try to rule out any underlying medical illnesses or psychiatric illnesses which have contributed to the offenses. So we do brain imaging. We also sometimes do EEG if clinically indicated. So the assessment is very comprehensive for offenders who are in prison for serious offenses like murder, drug trafficking. You know, Singapore laws for drug trafficking is very, very strict. So anybody who traffics above a certain amount of drugs for heroin or cannabis can face the death penalty. So even they are also seen by forensic psychiatrists, and a report is given to the court. And they also get lawyers representing them. If they can't afford, the state pays for lawyers who are actually very, very highly qualified as well. So then we make a diagnosis after doing all these assessments. So again, going back to the murder case, I may find that the particular offender may have suffered from a schizophrenic illness, a paranoid schizophrenia, a psychotic illness. And then I have to comment on the link between this illness and the offense. How did the disorder contribute to the offense? Then we talk about treatment, what treatments he needs to be receiving. So we have also psychiatrists inside the prison. So I'm a prison psychiatrist as well. I cover the prisons 2 or 3 days a week. So I see mentally ill offenders. We provide treatment. We give antipsychotics. We have nurses in the prisons, and we also have psychiatric wards. If they are unwell, we admit them to the psychiatric wards. So we provide prison psychiatrists will also provide treatment in the prisons because they cannot be sent to the hospitals because of their high risk due to committing murder. So they are managed inside the prison setting. We have to keep very, very good clinical records because every word you write in the record, in the notes for your case, can be subpoenaed to the court. The court can actually ask for the records to be submitted. So apart from your report, even the clinical entries you make is very, very significant. So every word you write has to be legible and recorded very systematically. Then we use something called open and close-ended questions as part of psychiatric interview. So We start with open-ended questions first. We ask them, how are things? How do you hear? How are you? How do you experience these symptoms? Then we ask close-ended questions like very, very focused questions as part of the interview. Psychological testing, as I mentioned, we can do IQ testing if needed, and neuropsychological testing if needed as well. Okay. So coming to the crucial points. So first step, check whether he's got a mental illness or not. Somebody may have a mental illness, but the mental illness may not have contributed to the offense. So he may have had depression, but he would have killed his wife when his depression was in remission, or he was not depressed at that time. So there's no link. Somebody may have had OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or a panic disorder. They commit a shop theft or they commit vandalism, but there's no link. So having a mental disorder there is coincidental. It's not contributory. Somebody commits a murder. He has a schizophrenic illness, which was in relapse. Let's say he had stopped treatment a year before, and he had psychotic symptoms, delusional, paranoid, hearing voices, hallucinations, and then he kills his friend or his wife. And then we can see the link. The psychotic illness contributed or caused the offense in that particular case. So the crucial point of time is to determine the state of mind when the offense was committed. So at that particular time, how is his behavior? So as I mentioned, when the person is arrested for a murder or a serious offense, they are brought to prison very quickly. So the offense happens 2 days ago. They are arrested by the police, kept in custody for a day. They are then charged in court for 302 murder, and then they're brought to prison remand. And then the psychiatrist goes and sees him for the forensic psychiatric assessment. So which is very close to the offense. So the closer to the offense is better, the more validity, because you can assess his mental state much closer to the offense. Because if you see him a year later, 2 years later, he would have already had treatment. His symptoms would have improved. He may also have memory issues. He may not be able to recollect events at that particular time. So then we also look at what's the motive for the crime. Has he had previous convictions, previous history, and also events after the offense? So you find that generally people with mental illnesses who commit crimes, they don't try to run away. They remain at the scene. They wait for the police to come. Some of them even call the police saying that they've killed their spouse or their family member. They wait for the police to come and arrest them. Some of them go to the police station and confess that they've done it. And so they usually don't conceal it. They don't run away. But it's not 100%, but these are some risks, some factors which can point to a mental illness. So at that state and post-offense, how is the mental state is very, very crucial. So we look at pre-offense, how was the person before the offense, at the time of the offense, and post-offense. This is the most crucial period, and we have to look at his symptoms at that particular point of time. Okay, now coming to criminal responsibility. A basic principle in law is that person is guilty of an act only if he had control over his behavior and chose to commit the unlawful act. It's called an actus. So the act of killing somebody is the actus. And then you have something called a guilty intent or a guilty mind. So at that time, what was the individual's mental state at the time of the act? Whether he had the capacity to form a guilty intent. It's called as mens rea. So these are two forensic terms we use commonly. The actus is the act. Mens rea is the guilty mind. The intention to commit the offense is the mens rea. So I can give you an example. Somebody drives a car. He has an accident. He runs over somebody on the pavement. The person dies. So here there's no mens rea. He did not go and drive the car purposefully to go and kill somebody, but he drive rashly and recklessly and kill somebody. So it's called culpable homicide. There is no guilty intent, but the act was somebody's death on the pavement because of his rash driving. So there's no mens rea of killing, but the act has happened. That's why it's not murder, but it's culpable homicide. The lay public may not understand this, but as doctors, we should know the difference between these two. Now, coming to psychiatric disorders, defense, you can have, again, you read the papers, you read the news, people may say this person committed murder, but the courts sent him off free. He was not punished, he was acquitted. Now that is called as not guilty by reason of insanity. So here what happens is the courts have to come to a conclusion that the offense, the murder happened because of a serious mental illness. And because of the serious mental illness, he had no understanding of the nature of his actions, and he did not know what he did was wrong or against the law. That is not guilty by reason of insanity. So this outcome is very rare. If you look at 100 or 150 homicides, you probably get only one who satisfy not guilty by reason of insanity, because for somebody to get not guilty by reason of insanity, they need to be totally insane, which means that they did not know what they were doing and they did not know what they did was morally wrong against the law, which is very, very difficult to prove. But you get cases of not guilty as well, but it's very rare. Second thing is diminished responsibility. Diminished responsibility is the person pleads guilty to the offense of to the murder, but then the murder happened because of a mental disorder, which contributed significantly to the offense. So his responsibility, criminal responsibility, was diminished by the presence of a mental disorder. So that this diminished responsibility is quite commonly argued for, and also some cases get diminished responsibility for murder. Now, diminished responsibility only applies to murder in Singapore, not for minor offenses. Third thing is you have automatism. Automatism implying absence or incapacity to form intent. So here there's no mens rea, there's no guilty mind. So the actus happens, but there's no guilty intent. I'll give examples of automatisms. Okay, now coming to not guilty by reason of insanity is still used in most Commonwealth countries, India, Singapore, UK, Canada. Insanity is only established when it's proved the defendant was laboring under such a defect of reason from disease of the mind as not to know the nature of the act he was doing, or if he did know it, that he did not know what he was doing was wrong and against the law. So this is the McNaughton's rule or McNaughton's principle for not guilty by reason of insanity. As I said, it's very difficult to get this verdict because it's very rare. How this is formed was based on the McNaughton case, 1843, when this person called Daniel McNaughton was acquitted by the courts when he tried to assassinate Robert Peel, who was the prime minister. So he actually fired a pistol at the back of Peel's secretary, a different person, Drummond, who died 5 days later because he was paranoid against the prime minister at that time and he was psychotic. So he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. But here what happens, he's not released into the community, but he's sent to hospital to get treatment. And they tend to stay in hospital for many years, but they don't go to prison. Okay, now coming to unsoundness of mind, you need to have a disease of the mind. So disease of the mind is a legal term, it's not a medical term. So the person has to behave in a different way, different from a normal person. So it's a more of a legal definition. But then the disease of the mind should be caused by a mental disorder, which the psychiatrists will explain. So we may say it's psychosis or bipolar or severe depression or severe intellectual disability, which contribute to the disease of the mind. So that part we talk about that. And then this disease should give rise to a defect of reason, which means that he doesn't know what he's doing is wrong or against the law, is what unsoundness of mind is. Coming to automatisms, I mentioned that automatisms, people can be acquitted. So in epileptic, somebody may have an epileptic episode. This particular person, R, was a Sullivan in 1984. He caused grievous harm due to epilepsy, due to epileptic fit. And he was not aware of what he was doing. And therefore, the state was found to be irrelevant. So he was acquitted. Then the second person example was he committed an assault when he was in a state of hypoglycemia by the insulin. So the insulin took, his sugars went down and then he committed an assault. He was found to have automatisms. Another example, R was Burgess. The Court of Appeal ruled that the defendant who wounded the woman by hitting with a video recorder while sleepwalking was insane. So again, sleepwalking episode, she did not know what she was doing and then voluntary caused hurt and then found to be of unsound mind due to automatisms of sleepwalkings. Okay, this one I've explained about nature and quality of the act. They're unaware of the nature, so we'll skip that. So McNaughton rules are a cognitive test of knowing insanity. So it's a higher threshold. It's very few cases satisfy this threshold. It's very difficult to meet this. Medical insanity is larger. So mental illness with delusions, hallucinations. Legal insanity is much narrower and it's defined by the courts. The courts decided finally, not the doctors. We comment on the medical insanity part. Okay, I talked about murder and culpable homicide differences. So in murder, the death is caused with the intention of causing death. So somebody intends to cause death and the person dies. And then somebody causes the death with the intention to cause bodily injury that you know is likely to lead to the death of the person. So causing severe hurt to the person, and you know that in your mind that he can die from bleeding or from internal injuries. You are aware of that. You can be charged for murder. Culpable homicide not amounting to murder are lower charges. It can happen when there's provocation. It's called grave and sudden provocation, a sudden argument or a fight. They get humiliated, they may lash out as part of a sudden fight. Right of private defense. Somebody burgles your house, you may take a gun or a knife to protect yourself. You stab the other person and the other person dies. It's right of private defense, but exceeded it. So these are all examples of culpable homicide, not amounting to murder. Okay, partial defenses are only available on a charge of murder. So diminished responsibility, as I mentioned, is a huge role for psychiatrists. Here we see whether there's a mental disorder contributed to the offense and how much did it contribute, how much responsibility was impaired. Then we talk about loss of control, infanticide, postpartum depression, woman killing an infant. Also, you can prove to have diminished responsibility. Or somebody commits suicide as a family pact, the whole family commits suicide. So that also the chances of having diminished responsibility is much higher. Okay, so this is diminished responsibility. This is a definition. A person shall not be guilty of murder suffering from abnormality of mind arising from a condition of arrested or retarded development of the mind caused by disease or injury, as substantially impaired his mental responsibility for his actions, commissions in doing or being party to the killing. So basically, there's three parts to it. You have the first part, which is the abnormality of mind, which is a legal concept. The second part is what the psychiatrists comment, the arrested or retarded development of the mind, which is intellectual disability, or inherent causes can be psychosis, can be mania, can be depression, disease can be encephalitis, injury can be post-traumatic head injury, or alcohol, dementia, things like that. So that's the second part we comment on. And the third part is the substantial impairment. So the mental disorder should have substantially contributed to the killing or to the mental responsibility. Therefore, then you can argue for DR or diminished responsibility, only applies to murder. Okay, it's a partial defense, which means that the person is not found to be of unsound mind, but he's found to have diminished responsibility. So his sentencing, he will not get the death penalty. He'll probably get life imprisonment, or he may get imprisonment for 20 years, 15 years, depending on the case. So he doesn't get death penalty if you prove diminished responsibility for murder cases. Okay, so this is again the slide about diminished responsibility. What is abnormality of mind is a legal concept. State of mind so different from normal human beings that a reasonable man will term abnormal. It's an elective defense. It's brought by the defense itself. Automatisms, technically, if a person has no awareness and no control, he cannot be responsible for it. It's a full defense, provided there's a total lack of control. It can be caused by physical and mental disorders, but not by voluntary intoxication. So you cannot drink alcohol and say, I lost control. Epilepsy, somnambulism, sleepwalking, yes. Hypoglycemia, head injury also can be used, but it's very difficult to prove again. Coming to fitness to stand trial. Fitness to stand trial is basically the defendant should understand the charges against him. So if he's charged for murder, he should know what the charge is, who's the victim, what are the implications of pleading guilty, what are the implications of pleading not guilty, what are the possible sentencing options, is it life imprisonment, is it death penalty, he should be able to follow court proceedings, he should be able to give instructions to the lawyers. These are all fitness to stand trial. So somebody is really psychotic and not respond to treatment, he's not fit to stand trial, because if he goes to court, he won't be able to follow all these principles. So he's found to be unfit to stand trial. So then what happens is the psychiatrist in prison needs to treat the person, try to get them better to make them fit to go and face trial. Because if you're unfit to stand trial, the remand continues to be extended until they're found to be sentenced. So that's fitness to stand trial. Now, coming to the another part of my talk is to how to write psychiatric reports. So forensic psychiatrists write court reports very often. The aim of the report is to assess the court and not to the person instructing the psychiatrist, as mentioned earlier. The duty is to the courts to come to their decision. The preparations for a medical legal report should be thorough and comprehensive. It cannot be done very fast. You need to be very, very systematic and very focused, and multiple interviews. Instructions can be given from the prosecution, defense, or the defendants themselves. So, as I said, the prosecution psychiatrist represents the prosecution. You have a lawyer who may hire a private psychiatrist to be the defense psychiatrist. So, you may have psychiatrists on both sides, on opposite sides sometimes. So, you may have one psychiatrist saying no mental illness, you may have another psychiatrist saying he's got depression. So, ultimately, he has to go to court and give evidence, and then the judge will decide on the outcome. So, before you see the patient, you have to read up on the background information. Stick to your area of expertise. Don't comment on things which you're not really aware of. So a psychiatrist shouldn't comment on liver cirrhosis and the complications because it's not his area of expertise. Now, in the report, you start with basic details, just like history taking, name, date of birth, sex, number of times seen, how much time you spent with the patient, number of hours, who referred the patient to you, what's the reason for assessment, what are the charges he faces. You mention the sources of information, background history, psychiatric history, forensic history, drug and alcohol history. Just like a psychiatric history, you take all these parts in detail. Then you do the MSE, the mental state examination. You obtain history from the family members. You ask the person to describe your offense, how the offense happened, to describe in detail in his own words. And you need to write that down in his own words. Then with all this information, you have to make a diagnosis, whether he's got a mental illness or not. If he's got a mental illness, is it schizophrenia? Is it depression? Is it whatever it is? And then you talk about unsoundness of mind, whether he's an unsound mind or not. Then you talk about causal link or a contributory link. How did the mental illness contribute to the offense? You talk about fitness to plead and stand trial. Then you give a treatment plan. If he's got schizophrenia, you need to say that the person needs to receive antipsychotic treatment for many years. And then you talk about risk of reoffending for minor offenses. So if it's a theft or a burglary or a vandalism, you have to also write in your report what's the risk of reoffending. So if he doesn't have insight into this condition, he doesn't want to take medicines, he's got very poor family support, if he's drinking alcohol, if he's got a personality disorder, then the risk of reoffending goes up. So these are all principles to decide about reoffending risk. Then you come to a final part of the description of the report. You talk about any other testing done, like IQ testing done or neuropsychological testing done. You write your diagnosis, then you give recommendations, you attach your CV to the report. Then what happens after you submit the report to the courts may even call you to come and give evidence, especially if there's a clarification the court needs to find out from the psychiatrist, or if there's a difference of opinion for both the prosecution psychiatrist or the defense psychiatrist. So then you have to go to court and then you have to give evidence. So you will have to go through something called examination in chief, which means if you start giving, you quote your own report, the lawyer will ask you and go through different parts of your report. Then you get cross-examined by the other side. So if you're called by the deputy public prosecutor as a prosecution witness, you can be cross-examined by the defense lawyer. If you're called by the defense lawyer, you'll be cross-examined by the public prosecutor. So it's both sides. Then you have something called re-examination at the end. So this is a very intensive process. I've been on the High Court stand for more than 2 days continuously for one of my cases. So it's quite a draining and intensive process where you have to be very, very systematic. Every word you write in the report has to be supported. You can't be lackadaisical, or you can't be very, you have to be very systematic and knowledgeable and in your approach to the psychiatric history taking. Okay, now coming to the final part of my talk, I'll go through a case example, which is a real case in Singapore. It was reported in the media, so there is no confidentiality issues here, because if you Google the case, you will find details about the case in the media. So I don't think there's any confidentiality issues for this particular case. So, but I haven't identified the person, so again, should not be an issue. So background history: he was first seen in hospital in 2003 for drugs-induced psychosis, which means that when he took drugs, he became psychotic. And after 2003 until 2012, there was no contact with psychiatric services for about 9 years. And he was employed. He was still working at the time. He had a history of conduct disorder, which means that when he was a child, he was very naughty, played truant, would miss school frequently, would smoke, was involved in fights, and even involved in stealing small value items. So we have a condition in psychiatry called as conduct disorder, where they behave badly. So he had that history in his childhood. He also went to prison once for theft. So he also went to a drug rehab center for the use of drugs in the past. So he has some forensic history before the main offense. He's been using drugs since the age of 14. Singapore is a very, very tough country for drugs. Hardly you get drugs in Singapore, but people still use it. So he managed to get cannabis, sleeping pills, and ecstasy. Ecstasy is a form of amphetamine, which he was using as a young person. He would also drink alcohol once in a while. And then he started using cough syrup. Cough syrup and is basically opioids. So they can use cough syrup addiction, they can become addicts. And Romilar is a trade name, and the content is dextromethorphan. Dextromethorphan is also used in cough syrups. You may find it's very common in India. You go to a pharmacy, you ask a person for a cough syrup, he'll give you dextromethorphan cough syrup. It's a common cough syrup used for suppressing the cough suppressant. He was using dextromethorphan tablets for about 2 years prior to the offense in 2012. And he was taking about 40 to 50 tablets of Romila, which is dextromethorphan, about 3 times a week. So very large amount, 3 times a week. And then he started hearing voices, or he became psychotic. He was talking to inanimate objects and also expressing feelings of depersonalization, which means that body floating, seeing himself from a third space and all that. So he was having psychotic experiences due to the Romila tablets. And there was no history of any previous violence towards his mother. The victim, the person who died, was actually his mother. He killed his mother in this case. So on the day of the offense, he took 40 tablets of Romila, which is dextromethorphan, on 2 days prior to the day of the offense, total of 80 tablets. He started to see things, hearing voices, and things moving. So he had hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, and visual hallucinations. He wanted to leave the house, but his mother asked him not to go out. He heard a voice telling him to slap her 3 times. Following this, he heard another voice telling him that she was not his mother and that she was a genie or a spirit. Her face appeared like a genie to him and heard a voice telling him to kill her, as she was not her mother, not his mother. Stabbed her with 2 knives, felt like he was stabbing a dummy, was the belief that she was stabbing a genie and not his mother. So he was not aware of the nature of his offense. He thought he was stabbing a genie here and not his real mother. After he stabbed her, he entered a neighbor's house through the kitchen window. The voices told him to go to the rooftop because he told him heaven was right up there on top of the roof. He damaged the lift switches, went back to the neighbor's house, and then took some money and changed the neighbor's clothes, went to a car rental shop, hired a car, drove around, and then bought a penknife, was hearing voices at that time. Subsequently arrested because his hands were cut and bleeding. So he didn't surrender in this particular case, but he was caught very soon. So the history was taken, overdosed himself on 120 tablets of dextromethorphan a year ago, but did not seek any psychiatric treatment. The mother refused to take him to a psychiatrist because she felt that he was having possession symptoms, being possessed by spirits, but she didn't take him for psychiatric treatment at that time. And then the psychiatrist in prison saw him for this particular offense. And then by the time the second interview happened a few days later, all his psychotic symptoms resolved because his condition was drug-induced psychosis, which means that once you stop taking the drugs, the psychosis resolves. If it's schizophrenia, the psychotic symptoms will continue to be there long-term, but with medications, they can get better. But drug-induced psychosis is very short-lasting. You take drugs, you become psychotic. Once the drugs is cleared from the body, within a month or within a few weeks, the symptoms can completely go away. So in this case, he had drug-induced psychosis, and the symptoms completely resolved after a few days after he came into prison. So in this case, he was found to have polysubstance dependence, which means cough syrup and dextromethorphan abuse. He was found to have temporary insanity, which means that He suffered from drug-induced psychosis caused by dextromethorphan at the time of the offense. He was certified to have unsound mind. So unsound mind, as I mentioned, is very rare. But in this case, he got unsoundness of mind because he was found to be not guilty by reason of insanity, which means that he didn't know the nature of the offense, and he was acquitted. Acquitted means you're not found guilty, but he's not released into the community as well because of his risk of going back to drugs again. So he was continued to be kept in prison, but managed by psychiatrists, and then he was sent to a hospital after that. So he has not been released in the community, but still in a hospital setting. But from a criminal point of view, he was not found to be responsible for his offense here because he was found to be temporarily insane. Temporarily insane means because of drug-induced psychosis. At that point, when he killed his mother, he was found to be insane from a legal point of view. He was having a delusion that he was killing a genie and not his mother, and did not know his action was wrong and unlawful. This is from the forensic assessment done at that time. This is many years ago, a few years ago, when this case happened. He was found to be fit to plead because his psychotic symptoms resolved completely after the offense. He knew what he did later on. He knew he was charged with murder. So he's found to be fit to plead, but he was found not guilty by reason of insanity by the courts. Yeah, so my talk is over. So.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajesh Jacob, for that beautiful overview of forensic psychiatry. I'm sure the students who are present here would have got the gist of this very fascinating subspecialty actually of psychiatry, and that, as I've already stated, is so neglected. Anyway, we have not much time, so let us look at the chat box and find out whether there are any questions for you. There is a question by Sridatta Prasad Reddy, who asks, is forensic psychiatry confined to psychiatry department, or is there any chance for forensic medicine pupils? I think he means as to whether somebody with a background of forensic medicine can dabble a little bit in forensic psychiatry or not.
Okay, so forensic psychiatry is actually a branch of medicine. So they have to do an MD or a diploma in psychiatry. As part of their psychiatry PG training, they can be posted in forensic settings in India. So NIMHANS is one place, or even Madras, MMC, or other central institutes of psychiatry in Ranchi. So they can be posted as part of forensic psychiatry postings as part of their training. You also have forensic psychologists in Singapore and Australia and all that, where they're psychologists, they're not doctors. And after doing bachelor's in psychology, they go and specialize in masters in forensic psychology, where they also see offenders, but they're not doctors. So they also can do reports. So there's one field to pursue. Coming to forensic medicine, they can go into, as I think your area of specialty, like health science authority, like analyzing poisons and urine drug tests, working in a lab. Those things can be part of forensic medicine, but they will not be dealing with clinically as a clinical patient. They won't be seeing patients, but they can work in a lab, analyzing the forensic aspect of crime. So DNA testing, things like that.
Yes, actually what you're saying is that to do something in forensic psychiatry, you should have a degree in psychiatry first. And having a degree in forensic medicine is not important
Yes.
unless, of course, he adds something in psychiatry to that. Like, for instance, he does something by way of some sort of fellowship or certificate course, something in addition to forensic medicine, in which case maybe he can do something in forensic psychiatry. So that is the answer with regard to that question. Then we have Dr. Varun Pai. Hello, Dr. Varun Pai. It's been a long time since we met. Yes, he has a question. Can a person with ASPD, that is, I think, antisocial personality disorder, plead diminished responsibility? Over to you, Dr. Rajesh.
No, personality disorders is very, 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 very difficult to get diminished responsibility, because personality disorders are considered not really a mental disorder by the courts, because it's part of your personality. You're behaving badly, you can have control. It's not really a mental disorder. So the courts look at schizophrenia, or bipolar or severe depression as mental disorders for offending. But somebody's got a antisocial personality disorder who commits crimes, who commits murder, they I would say almost zero chance of getting diminished responsibility unless they have a comorbid condition like a psychosis or a depression on top of that. So just antisocial personality disorder is not eligible for DR, diminished responsibility.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Then there's a question again from Sridatta Prasad Reddy, who asks, I think with regard to the case that you mentioned, is there any chance that the person gets depressed after knowing he has killed his mother when he became sane, sir?
Yeah, depression and remand after offenses are quite common. You may also have a higher risk of suicide as well. So somebody who's committed a murder of their own family member can go into severe depression after the offense in the prisons, and they are actually of higher risk of suicide. So that's the reason there are prison psychiatrists inside the prison. They're also placed in cells in Singapore, in camera cells, which is there 24 hours, there's a camera inside the cell, and they are not placed on their own. They're placed with other 2 or 3 cellmates. So they're under supervision all the time, and psychiatrists follow them up very closely. So they got a history of mental illness in the past, depression, done a serious offense, the chance of relapse is very, very high. Even people with no mental illness who've committed a serious offense, killed their family member, the chance of going into depression is also very high. Yes, that's a good question. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rajesh Jacob. There's one more question from Dr. Siddharth Reddy. He was my student. Now he's doing his psychiatry. I think he's finished. And he's very interested in forensic psychiatry, by the way. He's got a very pertinent question. And that is, how relevant is McNaughton rule in the current scenario?
Current scenario regarding, is referring to what? Current scenario of what? In the psychiatric practice, is it?
In India, in countries like Singapore, etc., is really McNaughton rule relevant? And for that matter, even the West, I think they have moved on from McNaughton rule to other rules, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So as mentioned earlier, it's very, very difficult to fulfill McNaughton's criteria because it's a very, very narrow criteria. It's only cognitive, just knowing the nature of the offense, knowing that what you're doing is wrong against the law. Because actions are not just knowing, it's your emotion, it's your affect, it's your volition, it's your impulses. They're much more beyond the knowledge. So it's very, very, very difficult to get acquittal on insanity, McNaughton's principles. But the case I quoted, he was acquitted based on McNaughton's rules. So that's why diminished responsibility has played more important, it's more common now. People with commit murders, the chance of getting diminished responsibility is higher as compared to McNaughton's.
Unfortunately, in India, the situation is that a lot of emphasis is still being placed on McNaughton rule.
Yes.
And I think it's high time that we formulated something on the basis of, the developments in psychiatry and had some sort of updating. That's what I always felt, because McNaughton rule was good at the time it was framed. But like the very country where it was framed, they have moved on to other, modifications. I think it's high time that India also moved on, and I think that is a crux in the question from Dr. Siddharth Reddy. All right, there's one more question. I'm not very sure how relevant it is. It's from Mohammed Maqsood, and he's asked, are the suicidal, I think what he wants to say is the suicide bombers in bomb blast or yes, I think so, are suffering from some psychiatric disorder?
No, I don't think that's a very difficult area. I think there's a few papers where they talk about terrorism, whether it's a mental illness or not. But then people don't consider that as a mental illness because they are kind of, their ideologies are different. Their thinking processes are not difficult, just that they're brainwashed or they go into that particular area. So it's just like religion, right? So you can't say people who are religious are psychiatrically unwell. So you may have very, very religious people who may talk in like Christians, some people speak in tongues. They may talk to God. Doesn't mean they are unwell, psychiatrically unwell. It's part of the religious experiences. So I don't think terrorism, suicide bombers are considered mentally ill. No, they're not.
So that's it with regard to questions in the chat box. But I've got a couple of questions on my part, if that is Professor Jacob Jaiswaran allows that. but this has been, on my mind for quite some time. This is the appropriate forum, and I think the appropriate person to ask. There's a lot of
Sir,
confusion.
we have absolutely the time and space. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. That's a relief because I got some very burning, kind of questions, and some
Please,
of them
sir.
asked by
Please.
my own students. So, Dr. Jacob, Rajesh Jacob, I would like to ask you as to, with regard to terms like psychopath, sociopath,
Yeah.
and of course ASPD.
Yeah.
What exactly do they mean? Are they really, psychiatric illnesses? And are these, terms synonymous or very closely related, or are they distinct from each other?
Okay. So antisocial personality disorder is well defined in the DSM and the ICD-10. So there are actually personality disorders. So which means that it's chronic, it's ingrained right from childhood, and then it's their ways of behaving and thinking. So they break rules. They lack empathy. They commit crimes at a very early age. They drink alcohol. Their lifestyle is very disruptive, but it's not a mental disorder like schizophrenia or bipolar. So it's very difficult to treat because it's a nature of behaviors, which is maladaptive. So that is ASPD. So if you find, if you look at prison settings, we do a study, a lot of them will have ASP, antisocial personality disorders, because they commit crimes, they come into prison, but they don't have psychosis or depression. Or very small number will have that as comorbidity. Sociopath is a lay person's term for antisocial personality disorder. He's a sociopath, antisocial. Again, committing crimes and no empathy, lack of remorse, lying, manipulative, and all that. Psychopath is an extreme form of ASPD. So there's something called a psychopathy checklist, PCPL. So it's an extreme form of antisocial personality where they have no empathy at all. They're very dangerous. They lack remorse. They're very manipulative. They have a history of conduct disorders, and they commit very violent offenses. So it's a very severe form of antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy. Yeah. So the offenses, so if they kill somebody, they may stab the person 100 times. There's no remorse at all. Or somebody who's raping somebody may commit gang rapes. So it's a kind of violent offending.
So, is it safe to say that somebody who is diagnosed as being a psychopath can, claim a defense of insanity in a crime like murder?
No. Because again, for not guilty by reason of insanity or McDonald's principles, antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy do not fulfill the criteria. They also don't fulfill for diminished responsibility because, first of all, the abnormality of mind is not caused by a mental disorder. So if you look at the three conditions, arrested or retarded development of mind is intellectual disability. The inherent cause is usually depression or psychosis. Injury is head injury or substance-induced psychosis. So antisocial personality or psychopathy doesn't come into that time frame. So personality disorders are not accepted for diminished responsibility or even for McDonald's principles. So you find that they are not found to be mentally unwell and they go to prison, they serve sentence, they're punished for the offenders.
That brings me to this question that is, always fascinating for the common man, the serial killer, kind of concept, as to whether, many of these serial killers, they are supposed to be mentally unwell. And in fact, terms like psychopath and sociopath and all that are used. So what's your opinion? Is a serial killer essentially a person with a mental illness, or is he somebody with a twisted kind of way of thinking?
Serial killer will also fall more into what you said, the psychopathic or the sociopathic or the antisocial personality element. Again, they don't fall into the mental disorders element. So even though the antisocial personality disorders is described in psychiatric classification systems, it is not a treatable condition. It's not a mental disorder by itself. It's part of their personality elements, but which is different from the rest of the people and which is maladaptive and causing distress to other people around them. So they again don't get away from the law based on McDonald's or diminished responsibility. They face the full force of the law.
So as far as so-called organized serial killer is concerned, that I agree. But there is some entity called a disorganized serial killer, isn't it? Who is almost like full-blown psychotic. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, usually if somebody is fully psychotic, schizophrenic who commits a crime, to go on a stabbing or a killing spree is very rare because they tend to be caught very easily. They either surrender or they are found to be so unwell at the time of the offense, they don't even run away. And then the police can arrest them very quickly. So it's usually one person, it's one-to-one killing. It's very rare for a psychotic person to kill 5 or 10 people to one go. It's more the personality disorders who do that.
What's your opinion on the series titled Mindhunter that's running on Netflix right now? I think 2 seasons, in case you've watched them, because I have watched the episodes. I find them very fascinating. And I'm really sorry that they have stopped it at the second season.
Okay. No, I've heard the series, but unfortunately, I've not seen it. I'll probably have a look at it. But again, serial killing is again something which is an important area of research and all that. But usually, they don't have disorders like psychosis or depression. It's more the sociopathic or the psychopathic personalities underlying, usually. And they also have a history of, if you look at childhood, they also have a history of abuse. They've got history of childhood abuse. They would have grown up in broken families. So a lot of psychological factors would have contributed to how they are now. But if you look at cross-sectionally, they have this personality disorder.
All right, so there's again a couple of questions in the chat box. One is from Reba Jacob, and she asks, who are the most difficult set of people to treat, psychopath, sociopath, or ASP?
Psychopaths are the most difficult people to treat because, first of all, they don't think that they've got a problem. They lack remorse. They have no insight. They are very manipulative. They think they're very smart. It's called the mask of sanity. So there's a person who described it, the mask of sanity. So they appear normal to everybody else, but they don't have remorse. So they will commit crimes. They will cheat people. They may do kidnapping or things like that, but they don't have any remorse. They don't confess. They go about normal lives. Psychopathy is a very difficult condition to treat. But luckily, it's very rare because you don't have so many psychopaths in the world. The world is a very dangerous place, right? Yeah, antisocial personality disorders are quite common. There was a study in Singapore where they looked at all the homicides in Singapore. As I said, the number of homicides in Singapore is very few. You can hand count them. So in the last 10 years, you probably would have had about 150 homicides in the last 10 years. So it's very easy to do research in this group. So they actually did a study about a few years ago. They looked at all the homicides and looked at how many of them had mental illnesses or not. Only 50% of that 150 people had mental disorders. The rest 50% did not have. So which means that 50% of the offenders who committed murder were not mentally unwell. They were normal people, but they had personality disorders, antisocial personality traits or disorders. They were using alcohol or they were using some drugs, but not the disorders like schizophrenia or depression or bipolar. So they didn't have that.
You said that psychopathy or psychopath as an entity, person's very difficult to treat. Are there any special kinds of drugs that are used in case you would like to treat a psychopath?
Yeah, psychopathy is, they have done EEG scans, they've done PET scans on people's psychopathy or antisocial personality disorders. They are very sensation seeking. So dopamine levels may be increased in certain parts of the brain. If you do EEG, sometimes there's something called kindling phenomenon. So sometimes we use anticonvulsants like sodium valproate, epilim, tegretol for impulse control. There's something called intermittent explosive disorder. It's described in psychiatry, where they tend to lose anger very easily. Very trivial provocation, they may become very physically aggressive, break things, hit people, then they have remorse after that. It's like they lose control. It's called IED, intermittent explosive disorder. So if you do EEGs for them, there may be some form of kindling phenomenon going on. So we use anticonvulsants like tegretol, sodium valproate, even antipsychotics in low doses like quetiapine or even olanzapine to reduce the impulsivity and the hyperarousal. So some literature is available, but it's not the drug, it's not the treatment. They would need to go for behavior therapy and then get the family involved to try to get some understanding about how their behaviors are affecting other people. But they're they don't seek treatment, yeah, unless they're referred by criminal justice services.
Okay. There's one more question from Vignesh, and he asks, in prison psychiatry, for some procedures like ECT, how and from whom do we get consent? I'm not very sure as to what exactly his question means, but I think he is asking about the concerns that people should have about procedures like ECT. Is
Yeah.
ECT still, something that is done widely, or is it now very rare?
ECT use has dropped dramatically across the world because of the advances in pharmacology. Antidepressants, we've got so many types, different types now. But ECT is sometimes used very rarely. Even in prisons, we don't have ECT facility inside the prison, but if they require ECT, we transfer them to the nearest psychiatric hospital where they have a full ECT service, modified ECT under anesthesia. And then the consent is usually, what happens is the consent is taken from the patient, but if the patient is found to be mentally incapacitated, then the family member is also involved. And then we have two psychiatrists who will actually sign assess capacity and then document that the person lacks capacity to consent for ECT. But in their best interest, ECT is indicated despite all other treatments, and they cannot respond to other treatments. Then two psychiatrists can give consent on their behalf. But once they regain the mental capacity, we have to retake the consent from the patient again. But if if they're found to have mental capacity, then they can refuse. We cannot force them.
Okay. There's a comment actually from Professor Kanagwal. I know him. Good evening, sir. It's a long time since I've interacted with you. And his comment is that, in my view, a suicide bomber is determined and does the preparations to accomplish the task. I think what he means is that suicide bomber is, like you said, not necessarily somebody who is having a mental problem, but somebody with that kind of determination to cause, kind of a crime in under some religious belief and things like that. So I don't think we should be calling, terrorists or suicide bombers are having mental health issues, though some of them may incidentally have them, if that is right.
Yes, yes. As a group, we cannot definitely call them as mentally ill, but if we screen some of them, they may have conditions like the rest of us have, because comorbidity is quite common, right? 5% of people in the population will have depression at some point. So they may fall into that category. But suicide bombers by itself are not mentally unwell people, no.
Okay, yes. I can see Professor Jacob Jayasuran is getting a little...
Good evening, sir.
The question session is going on and on.
All right, not at all, sir. Not at all, sir. I'm enjoying every part of it.
Okay, just a couple of questions more from me actually now to Dr. Jacob, Rajesh Jacob, because there's a little bit of confusion. Both of you are Professor Jacob.
So Rajesh, yeah.
Okay. See, actually, with regard to films, I'm very interested in cultural influences with regard to mental health and how mental health is being projected in, for instance, books or literature or films and things like that. I often talk about these things to my students also, partly to make the subject more interesting, and of course, from the point of view of application. As to how the common perceives mental illness. And sometimes we get very good films that show, mental illness very realistically, but often we find that mental illness is projected in a kind of denigratory or derogatory manner or a mocking, kind of manner. And that I find very sad. I wanted to mention a few films, like, for instance, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in English. And also there are so many others in English which have dealt with mental issues very realistically, like Rain Man, a very old film that dealt with, I think, autism. And then A Beautiful Mind, that dealt with, I think, schizophrenia, if I'm not mistaken, a very famous mathematician. Then there is Silver Linings Playbook, Black Swan, so many. And Shutter Island also. Films, however, unfortunately in India, we come across very rarely films that are dealing with mental health, in a sensitive manner or a realistic manner. One of the films that come to mind is, of course, Karthik versus Karthik, and Karthik calling Karthik. I don't know whether you've seen it or whether you see, Hindi films, but that is one of the, odd, kind of man out as far as Hindi films are concerned. Though, incidentally, since I'm in Kerala, I have to talk about Malayalam films. There have been some Malayalam films which are excellent and which have portrayed mental illness in a very, very realistic manner. One movie that comes to mind immediately is Mammootty's, Bhuta Kannadi, that was quite old, long ago it was made. But then more recently he acted, I think, as a psychopath, if I'm not mistaken, in Munna Rape, a film that did not deserve, they did not really get the attention that it deserved. And then, of course, Mohanlal in Tanmatra, who very sensitively portrayed a man with Alzheimer's. So, what is your opinion with regard to mental illness that is depicted in films, which have a very wide reach? Should not the regulatory authority be a little bit more careful as to what kind of films they're passing when it is to do with mental health? And if it is depicted wrongly, should there be some sort of regulatory mechanism to see to it that such films do not reach the common man?
Yeah, and I definitely strongly agree with you, because I've also watch Malayalam movies once in a while. If you look at the old movies, ECT being given unmodified, people holding the patient down and then giving the current treatment to the brain, and then the frothing at the mouth. So all that gives a very, very adverse exposure to the public who don't have any information about mental illnesses, and then they see this, they even get more frightened. So the stigma goes up further. So the portrayal of mental illness in the film industry is very, very important, and it needs to be a very balanced approach. I think recently there was, I think, another movie they looked at, I think, Asperger's syndrome. I think the famous Malayalam actor, I forgot his name. He's acted in that movie which what's the hero of the Prem? Niven Pauly and Trisha Krishnan acted in a movie.
I think you're
Hey Jude. Hey Jude, right? Yeah. I saw that movie. Yeah, Hey Jude. That was a good movie because he portrayed the Asperger's syndrome very well there. How he portrayed it. So there is an autistic disorder, and then the portrayal was quite realistic, and I didn't find much stigma to it. So there are some good movies which portrayed in a positive light, but majority would be, I would say, negative. So if you look at the Dean of Royal College, who is an Indian psychiatrist, Dinesh Bugra, he has given talks about films, mental health in films, Indian films especially. He's done a review. Actually, he's also published about it. So it's usually negative. Most of the time, it's negative portrayal. I would say 80 to 90%. But there are people who've got sentimental and address the issue in a much more pragmatic and more realistic way. In Singapore, there's something called Singapore Mental Health Film Festival. Where people with mental illnesses actually produce short films, and then they educate the public. Stigma is common all over the world, not just in India. So, but the levels of stigma vary from different parts of the world. If you go to the Western countries, stigma is much lesser. People have no qualms to come and see a psychiatrist or a shrink. They are willing to talk. But in India, it's obviously stigma is still very high. So the portrayal in the public media, in the newspapers, reporting of suicides, it's a different point from what you said. But again, if you start reporting suicides in the main pages, suicide rates even go up. So because you don't want to portray in a negative way. So there are many things people can do. Regulatory authorities, media can need to clamp down on the portrayal.
We are now, close to winding up. There's a question from Jeevan George, a third-year MBBS student from Believers Church Medical College, who asks as follows: apart from trauma to the psyche at a younger age, does such exposure at a much older age have a chance of triggering a derangement of the mind to the level of being a serial killer? It's a bit long question, but I think it's a very pertinent question.
Yeah, serial killer, usually the childhood is very disruptive. They may have broken families, divorces in the family, alcohol abuse, parental abuse, physical abuse in childhood, sexual abuse. All that factors play a very, very, very crucial role. But when you become older, your personality is already developed. By 21 years, you're already a fully mature person. They say after 24, you have to wait sometimes. So after 24, after that, to have somebody getting a personality is not very, very rare, because it's long term, it's ingrained. So the changes need to happen much earlier. So if somebody's personality changes after 30, you would suspect organic conditions, physical illnesses, brain injury, post-traumatic head injury, epilepsy, or a functional psychiatric illness. So somebody's personality to change suddenly or after 30 or after 25. So I wouldn't think it's you can't get a serial killer suddenly at 30 unless he's committed crimes in the past which is never picked up. And then he gets arrested and then they find that he's been, so it's probably unlikely.
Okay. Coming to a comment from Dr. Siddharth Reddy, that's very, kind of reflective of the situation in India with regard to films and how, regulation to be done by a censor board is done in the wrong kind of manner. The Indian Psychiatry Association, I believe, filed a petition to rename the title of movie Mental Hai Kya. That is a kind of derogatory title. And the censor board then changed that title to Judgmental Hai Kya. You are as to whether that is the right way to go about it, and they could have the content of the movie as to whether that's appropriate or not, and not pay too much attention to the title. Yes, I understand when you have a title like Mental Hai Kya, it's a kind of slightly mocking way of addressing a person with a mental problem. Finally, there's a question from Dr. Ashok Chanana, who asks, what is the scope of forensic psychiatry in the UK? He is very specific and he wants to know the scope in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, forensic psychiatry is a well-recognized specialty in the UK. So once they finish MRC Psych training 3 years, they can decide in the senior residency program or the specialist training, they can decide to go into forensic psychiatry. So you get a CCST in forensic psychiatry, Certificate of Completion of Specialist Training in Forensics. So after your 3 years MRC Psych, you can go into psychogeriatrics, or you can go into forensic, you can go into child psychiatry or general adult. So you can choose to specialize, and you can apply to the big forensic hospitals like Broadmoor or Liverpool or somewhere, Leicester, and then you can apply for jobs as a special registrar there as part of your training. Then you come out as a forensic psychiatrist.
Well, that's it, Dr. Rajesh Jacob. And
Yes.
we had a wonderful kind of session. At least I enjoyed every minute of it. And especially the question answer sessions, they cleared up a lot of doubts and misconceptions. We are really indebted to you. And of course, Professor Jacob Jesuran for organizing this whole exercise. And I hope there will be more such sessions, especially in neglected areas of medicine. Forensic psychiatry is a classical example. And I think this session hopefully will be a small step in the direction of doing something with regard to forensic psychiatry, highlighting its scope and raising the level of interest among students, medical students, who are not much exposed to this because it's not dealt with in the medical curriculum at all, virtually. So I'll close the session with just one final question, sir, and that is this confusion between the so-called DSM and ICD with regard to classification of psychiatric disorders. I often face a problem. India does follow the ICD. Now I think it's ICD 11, if I'm not mistaken. If we have finally moved on from ICD 10 to 11 after maybe 20 or 30 years. But then DSM has been regularly updated, and I think now it's DSM 5. Why don't we merge the two together to stop this kind of confusion in various parts of the world?
Yeah, actually, it's again a very valid question, because in my MD exam, I remember the essay was compare and contrast between DSM-4 and ICD-10, because when I was studying MD, it was DSM-4. So it is actually a lot of disorders have very similar descriptions in both countries. DSM is American Psychiatric Association. ICD is used elsewhere, Commonwealth, Europe, Australia, England, and all that. So ICD-11 is actually coming out next year. They've come up with a research version. The clinical guidelines should come out next year. 1992 was the last version. So but the DSM updates every 6 to 8 years. So DSM-5, yeah. So if you look at the DSM-5 and ICD-10, they give cross references. So if you have, like, say, PTSD in DSM-5, there will be a bracket referring to ICD-10 there as well. So it's like a cross reference. So a lot of it is over. I would say 80% is overlapping, but then the DSM is there. I think it's more of a political compulsion, because the American Psychiatric Association has been supporting or coming out with DSM for so many years, right? So I don't think they will agree for a WHO ICD-10. Similarly, WHO will not want to follow the American system, right? So I think that will still remain as it is, but overlap is quite significantly high. 80 to 90% is an overlap here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajesh Jacob, for this very enlightening and entertaining and educative session. We all, I'm sure, enjoyed. I would also like to thank, of course, once again, Professor Jacob Jesuran for this, for organizing this kind of lectures. It's a wonderful initiative, and I hope he will keep doing it and explore newer and newer areas and get more and more speakers. One way of really stimulating the interest of students in various aspects of medicine. And final word of thanks, of course, to the participants who have been very patiently listening to the whole thing. And there are some colleagues of mine also, some students of mine, and of course a lot of people from Believers Church Medical College, or a lot of students and faculty also, I suppose. And I would like to thank all of them for very patiently listening to the whole thing. I hope they really found it useful as well as interesting. So thank you once again, Dr. Rajesh Jacob and Dr. Jacob Jesuran. Over to you, sir, to make the concluding remarks.
Thanks a lot, sir, for hosting it and for all your questions. Good to probably keep in touch after this as well. Yeah, we will keep in touch. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Jacob Jesuran.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, B.V. Pillai, sir, for that wonderful moderation. And Rajesh Jacob, sir, extremely grateful to you for coming over, sparing your precious time and giving this amazing session for us. We are all grateful to you. And especially the Q&A session came out really well. It was really fruitful. So everybody is acknowledging the session, and we are getting a lot of feedback in the form of messages. So thank you, sir. Thank you once again from the bottom of our heart, and on behalf of the management, administration, faculty, and students of Believers Church Medical College and Hospital. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Okay.
And thank you, sir. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yes, sir. V.V. Pillai, sir. With a special thanks to you too. I know you're also a very busy person. Thank you so much for sparing this time for us and making this session into a really enriched one, bringing in all your wide perspective in and your vibrant comments and perspectives. And a lot of your students also came in and came in with their own ideas and comments. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Goodbye. Sure. Okay. Thanks all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And I would like to thank all the participants also. This is our Golden Jubilee webinar, and it was really a golden one. And tomorrow we have, on the 9th, we have the Professor and Head of Neurology at the University College of London from UK speaking to us on epilepsy. So he's Dr. Leigh Sanders, a very well accomplished physician. So it's a great privilege to have him, and to moderate the session, we have Dr. John K. John, Professor and Head of Neurology at Believers Church Medical College and Hospital. So looking forward to that session and looking and expecting all of you to be present there too. On the 9th, that is coming Tuesday at 6 p.m. So on that note, have a very blessed Sunday and weekend, and take care, stay safe, wear your masks, sanitize, socially distance, take care. Signing away from Believers Church Medical College and Hospital, this is Dr. Jacob. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.